Prior to an outbreak of necromorphs resulting in the extinction of an entire altered species and then the subsequent creation of a Brethren moon, many boxes had to be checked in order for the process to overwhelm said species and build up so many casualties as possible, as quickly as possible, that would give the marker a chance of converting everyone and everything currently on that rock. Initially, the marker will touch down on a planet, and in our case, this resulted in wiping out the dinosaurs, which gave mammals a chance to rise up and become the dominant species on this rock, and this would be by design. You see, dinosaurs had already naturally evolved on this planet, and it may be that this could have given them some resistance or incompatibility, allowing them to not be as affected by the marker's signal. I say this because we actually see the same resistance in some humans. As mammals would evolve over time, unknowingly they were guided by a low-level signal, becoming more and more susceptible with every adaptation and evolutionary trait passed on. Being ingrained in the very fabric of these creatures' being, this would pave the way for the black marker to cause an affliction to any species that would rise from the lowly tiers to spacefaring possibly, given them a very distinct attitude and reproductive pattern. You see, a species was grown as fast as possible in order to create more Brethren moons. The obvious consequence of this is that that species, in this case Homo sapiens, would be bred almost out of control, scooping up resources along the way and realizing quite quickly that we needed to move out amongst the stars to further fuel our society if we wanted to continue living the way our species was accustomed to. Whether by luck or dumb chance, it appears that this particular route was not intended or possibly not accounted for by the Brethren moons, which means humanity is just awesome and we're always going to be number one, so it really doesn't matter. It may be possible that when the black markers struck the Yucatan Peninsula, it was so far out of the way that the moons really don't appear to really dictate where it strikes or just that it strikes. Humanity wouldn't really know that the marker was there during a critical point in our energy concerns. What it appears is that the marker will touch down on a rock, grow a species, and prior to them becoming spacefaring, the species will find the marker, think all of their problems are solved, and begin replicating that apparent benevolent alien technology in order to power their society. But if you had something that just infinitely put out power, you would have to ask yourself, what happened to the species that originally used that? Anyways, upon doing so, a necromorph outbreak will happen much like what we have seen with the Tau Valantians. They did not appear to be spacefaring despite being highly intelligent, although a case could be made that they were. It's just the markers seem to have decimated their other colonies, probably like it did their home planet, but again, we don't really find any evidence of them being on other worlds. On Earth, humanity seems to not really have known about this marker, and the only people that did were horrified of the issues it caused mentally, as they would cross their fingers whenever speaking about it in superstition. Mental illness and hallucinations would run rampant through their small village, as apparently only the most resilient appeared to survive long term. Because of this, humanity would branch out amongst the stars at first in an effort to solve our energy crisis rather than turning to the marker. And what's interesting about this is it would likely make it much more difficult to wipe out humanity in general, as humans would be scattered all over even after losing Earth and the freaking DLC for Dead Space 3. How lame was that? Anyhow, there would be one man in particular, though, that would come across the black marker and would inadvertently almost trigger a massive necromorph outbreak with the variant in today's topic. So, let's get into today's lore and physiological changes, snapping limbs, ripping muscle, and altering functionality of the human body to the form of the Infector Necromorph. So I think the best place to start is the lore of everything that happened to make this first Infector, because the Infector is the original Necromorph. The date is 2214. Altman and his team would set out with some researchers to study the impact crater in the Yucatan Peninsula off the coast of Mexico. While they were attempting to understand this chunk of black rock that was definitely made and not by accident, it would appear to put off a limitless source of energy, which for our species would be invaluable. However, the age-old adage of no free lunches needs apply here. Much like Facebook, if you aren't paying for it, you are the product that is being sold. And that's why you see so many ads. As they attempted to safely harvest this power, it became rapidly apparent that this was having consequences on the mental stability of the researchers. The team began to regularly suffer from nightmares and headaches. However, it would appear that this signal is not really as aggressive as the later red markers, and how quickly it would alter people who came into contact with it. This appeared to be only for Altman, however. After bringing this thing to the surface, they would find that some researchers began to become violent. However, Altman, being extremely close to the marker and not changing or exhibiting any of these issues, had him elevated to the status of unwilling prophet, who apparently the marker must speak directly to. However, as we have discussed in several videos, it is much more likely that he had a resistance to the marker, sort of like Isaac did, and that given enough time, he too would succumb to its effects. As they studied the black marker, they gleaned more information from the strange markings and symbols, and would later find they were DNA instructions with the double helical structure also representing our own genetic coding. Knowing that this was alien technology, Altman, who was just a researcher and not a cult leader, and in fact was highly concerned about the black marker and what it could do to the human race, would go public with the information. This proved without a doubt that there were aliens out there, which was some concern to Homo sapiens at the time, as everywhere we looked, even seemingly habitable planets at one point in time contained no life, just chunks of lifeless rock with a ruined atmosphere. As a result of this, Altman would be brought back to the research base. Essentially, they called it recaptured, where eventually the marker would make its move. He would bear witness to the first Necromorph outbreak and just barely managed to escape with his life, although the rest of his team who helped him escape would be taken out by the creatures forming and attacking, initially starting with an Infector and a Leaper. After surviving this and sinking the black marker back into the ground, the Gooberment did what the Gooberment always does and gets upsetty over the spilling of spaghetti out of Altman's pocket. On March 15th, 2215, Altman would be taken out by mysterious and quite clearly sus actions. Because of this, much like anything the government tries, it keeps having the opposite effect, and rather than stuffing out this information and making sure nobody looked, this would Barbra Streisand this thing into the stratosphere, making a ton of people aware of what happened, which in turn caused unitology to grow faster than any other religion ever created or disseminated on Earth. Altman would become a martyr for unitology, spreading the marker's influence, which, once again, is the exact opposite of what he would have wanted. Upon completion of this, the information about the marker would be sealed away, but still studied. Eventually, humanity would create their own red markers, deploying them on backwater planets, including Aspera, Cremar, and Aegis 7, which I think we all know how that turned out. The government would cover up these tests, realizing, this was pretty much a stupid idea. More time would pass, roughly about 2 decades or so, until these sovereign colonies would find the planet of Tau Volantis, which had the same markers humanity wanted to build that resulted in the extinction of their entire race. And a Necromorph outbreak amongst the human ranks would cause an order to be delivered that essentially took out everyone who knew anything about the project or even the planet in an effort to stop the spread of information about the markers. Roughly 150 years would pass until we would see another Infector pop back up as the planets that housed the markers were quarantined. But oh, what's that? A massive planet-cracking ship known as the USG Ishimura is here to start the process all over again. Here we go. Illegally mining this world, we all know the story. The colony would exhibit aggression and violence, the likes of which many medical personnel and security forces were not equipped to deal with. What turned into humans beating humans to their end would then turn into rumors of these creatures running around in the dark, entering vents, and dragging people off to their doom until the numbers would tilt and it would become apparent something horrific was happening apart from just human issues. The initial outbreak requires many things: bodies, the signal, and a way to make tissue reanimate. The original Necromorph, the one that is responsible for all the changes and variants that it appears, is the Infector. Having a log about the process, we will discuss the changes and why they are happening to the body, but prior to that, we need to take a look at its physiology, which exists for an actual reason. Starting with the feet, we see this creature's apparent hands are not really hands at all. There are tarsal bones, or these are the tarsal bones of the foot, and the leg has been snapped at the knee completely backwards at 90 degrees, or essentially 180 degrees based on what we're looking at. The reason for this is because when the ribcage cracks open, the structural stability of the arms is compromised, and as a result, they are not really used for anything else apart from likely moving upwards near the warped skull to become one of the several proboscis. Now, one of the things about proboscis is in the scientific field, you say proboscis, but in everyday language, I've heard people say proboscis with like a C, like a hard C. I don't really care. I'm going to call it proboscis. Moving down the legs, we see the skin here has bridged the gap with the skin that was likely on the back as well to form the wings. This will allow for them to be airborne for a short period of time by flapping these legs, giving them a height advantage over the body that they are choosing to infect. As we follow the backside of the wings, we can see that there are a few holes in them and the spinal column can still be seen, and actually it's relatively normal form. Around where the head would be, we can see the shoulder blades of the person now sit about roughly where the completely altered head is. Where the neck originally sat, protrusions now exit this point, with one large centralized one appearing to be a combination of the spinal column and esophagus that will be used to transfer the fluid into the body of the creature it is infecting. The head itself is completely gone, or said to be gone as it peeled backwards, and the skull has now helped to form this tube, but moving back down to the abdomen and thoracic region, it is completely open with no ribs visible to speak of, having all likely been dissolved entirely to bolster other areas of the body with the calcium necessary to build new bone and grow existing bone. There is virtually almost no resemblance to a human apart from the skin itself due to just how extensive the bone mutations are, making this thing absolutely horrific. This entire process would be observed by Dr. G. Abernathy down on Aegis 7 during the initial outbreak on the planet. At the conclusion of this mutation, he would meet his own end, but it gives us a pretty good idea of how meaty this transformation is. Patient log, Dr. G. Abernathy, Aegis 7 Clinic, automated transcript. I've quarantined the former Dr. Clifton and Hogan. I barricaded them in, and I intend to keep a complete log no matter what happens here. Different vectors of the infection seem to be someone needs to keep a record. If the marker signal can change a body from a distance, we need to know. The chest of Dr. Clifton's corpse has started to expand, like it's taking a deep breath. Something appears to be happening underneath the surface of the skin. The body's convulsing. There's a yellowish, briny liquid that is bursting from the mouth. He's choking, but God, I hope it's just a gas release. Initially, the creature starts off as a normal body, but as we look at its chest, we can see the ribs have splayed open, pretty much exposing all of the organs, lungs, heart, and esophagus to the open air. This would imply the sternum to a large degree has melted away and the intercostal muscles of the ribs, as well as the latissimus dorsi or lat muscles, have pulled back to almost seizure-like strength, tearing the ribs open and exposing the body. Prior to this happening, when the body is still in their former human form, however, it's apparent their intestines had either naturally occurring microbiome or had the naturally occurring microbiome altered by the signal, or at some point the person was exposed to this viral bacteria that comes with the Necromorph outbreak. Either is completely possible, although it is mentioned that this infection can have the human body's own immune system conquer it, but the marker affects the functionality of that system, so it is also possible that if a person is infected rather than forcibly changed, they are likely to become an infector. As this fluid builds up, eventually this would disrupt their own biochemistry to the point, concerning at least their intestines, that they would expire and begin throwing up this fluid. Update. Okay, now there's, the esophagus is bulging and the jaw is collapsing. The head, his head is splitting apart. It's reforming, almost like a proboscis with feelers. The chest is splitting along the center now. The chest is splitting and it's stretching, expanding outward as the internal organs, muscle, and bone are bent inwards. Can I get a scanner, please? No, the scanner. Thank you. Looking at the creature, we have talked about the hypothesized dissolving of the sternum with the ribs cracking open. However, it should also be known that while the jaw does sit in the temporomandibular joint area, which is how the jaw actually connects to the skull, it is muscle and ligaments that connect the mandible to the actual skull. So as the purpose of these connective tissues are changed, the jaw would simply fall off as it's no longer useful. The skull at this point does appear to grow, with the head clearly showing openings where the bone exits out. However, the proboscis itself appears to be that of the spinal vertebrae column combined with the esophagus as they run right out next to each other. They would appear to explode upwards, possibly through remnants of the face, and likely come out of the area where the eyes would usually sit, as this would be the weaker area concerning bone, allowing for the proboscis to exit the body. Update. So the internal organs have reorganized themselves. Its structure there seems to be a central organ now resembling a massive bladder. The bladder is filling with a liquid, some of which can be seen spilling out from the creature's proboscis. So the two must be connected. The central organ is that of the stomach. Much like when the person is throwing up this liquid initially, it works in much the same way that it does when it's in its unaltered infector form. The stomach is predominantly a muscle. Upon its contraction, it's clear the fluid can be pushed out through the newly formed proboscis by following the esophageal pathway that already existed. This would imply that this bacteria naturally grows along the walls of the stomach, now likely moving up from the small intestine where it colonized the person initially and began growing. Along with this, the fluid of the stomach that it naturally produces, which would be stomach acid, would likely have to be changed in some way instead, just becoming sort of a medium for the bacteria to be housed in. So this would mean that the epithelial cells that actually line the interior face of the stomach, which, usually produce stomach acid, pepsinogen, and mucus, would likely increase the amount of mucus that they're producing naturally and probably get rid of the other two. Although it is completely possible that the viral bacteria itself is just resistant to the effects of acid, as we can see a very similar looking material in Dead Space 2 concerning the puker when it takes people out, and we all know that is still highly acidic. It may also be that when the infector attacks, if this is stomach acid, it can help to break down tissues in the way, allowing for the bacteria to more rapidly infect the body. Update. The legs are quivering violently. The flesh is peeling away and merging with the flesh for the chest. Fuck. Sorry. Shit. The legs just bent backwards and, okay, now the other one just snapped at the knee as well. It's, starting to sit up. It seems fully reanimated. Can we, hello? Yeah, PSEC. Anyone who's free to euthanize. God, do I have to think of everything? With these legs broken backwards at the knee, we can start to understand just how potent this reanimation process is. Breaking bone by using muscle is actually completely possible if our brains didn't limit the strength that we use every day, but with the marker controlling this transformation, the muscle is used at its maximum strength threshold to do just that, which is snap bone. Update. The spatter on the glass is making observation difficult. I missed that Dr. Hogan is also transforming, but it's not his legs are elongating, somehow flaying themselves, and they're twisting with a mixture of his own internal organs, instead into a single appendage. It's like some sort of tail. His face is contorting. His jaw is clenching and unclenching. It's crunching on itself and shit. Several jaw-like appendages are emerging from his mouth, but it can't accommodate oh shit. His head is splitting open too, like Clifton's. I can't update. Oh fuck. He's circling the room. It's not like Clifton, it's like he's hunting. Does he see me? No, the vents. He's going for the vents. PSEC, is anyone left? This would ultimately result in the doctor's end because of how the infection process proceeds. Once an infector is created through the absolute destruction of his host's original form and the fact that a leaper just formed in there as well, the fluid is going to be aimed at anything walking around. However, getting the fluid on you might be enough to slowly infect you over time, given it works like any other infection. It should be noted that the human immune system is once again capable of using macrophages to destroy the bacteria by undergoing phagocytosis and lysing the bacteria internally and breaking it down within the white blood cell. Also, the skin provides a great barrier, as with all microorganisms, but any cuts on a person may increase the likelihood that they will be infected. The main purpose of the infector, however, is to take a person out and inject this fluid directly into the brain of the person. Amongst the unitologists, they intentionally bored holes into their head, as the infector appears to prefer not having to crack through the skull in order to infect a person. This is why when you find them, they all have holes already in their heads. Upon attacking any body that's lying on the ground, the infector will shove the proboscis into their skull. In the case of the captain, it must break through the skull initially, but for the other unitologist, it will easily enter the brain tissue with very little resistance. When a person is flooded with this fluid, the bacteria will almost immediately begin changing their body. In the presence of the marker, energy is provided to even dead cells to change their metabolisms from oxygen-based to marker energy-based. They will be able to operate even if the host is gone mentally. And you might think it's kind of strange how they can just change their metabolisms like that, but again, remember, the marker essentially built humans. So there is likely a underlying background metabolism that can be switched to upon activation of the marker. But when this happens, the viral bacteria comes in and begins changing the genetic coding, rapidly activating mitotic genes as well as the HOX-A and HOX-D clusters, which controls patterning and overall morphology of the human form. Controlling these genes responsible for the musculoskeletal system and its development would be of huge importance to altering the overall physiology of the body. And how would it know to do this? Once again, the body was built by the marker, or at least somewhat influenced or mostly influenced by the marker. So the marker would put in the things that it can change, which is why it's so easily able to do so. By reactivating these genes, as well as implanting more instructions into the genetic coding of a human, new limbs will sprout forth, such as scythe limbs of the slasher, along with many other changes to the already present structures of the body. This is an entire body event, as no cell is left unchanged, completely changing the human body into whatever the infector needs at that particular point in time, which it seems to favor a leaper. It should also be noted that this rapid of a mitotic event should cook the slasher, as this would produce a massive amount of heat. The energy itself for this process, again, is provided by the marker, but because this does not cook the body, it can be assumed the cells are turned into a form of extremophile able to deal with these elevated temperatures. This would also help to explain how these infected can exist out, say, in the vacuum of space with no issue, as their cells are able to undergo their chemical processes utilizing newly formed enzymes regardless of high or low temperatures likely provided to them by the viral bacteria. Coming into contact with the already living presents a much larger challenge to the infector, however. While it can swing its proboscis at a person, it may injure them somewhat, but the process is clunky and slow, meaning the infector has very little in terms of self-defense. So, the best defense is a good offense, am I right? The infector will jump onto a person using its tethering limb from its midsection to wrap around the person. This is potentially going to be the remnants of the trachea or possibly even an arm. Wrapping around Isaac, for instance, he will put up his hands to block the proboscis from striking him. Its plan is to pull a person in and wrap its legs around them like a 40-year-old trying to have a youngling to prevent them from escaping. And much like that, the process will result in your end if they are successful. If a person is not able to get away from the proboscis or misses a block, or even potentially if their arms are pinned to their sides, the proboscis will crack through their forehead and into the frontal lobe, disseminating the fluid, which will change them. This will result in massive brain hemorrhages, which in turn will lead to a quick bleed out, as well as them to become a slasher moments later. For Isaac, though, it seems much more personal as he was actively attacking it. As it stabs through his helmet, it will keep attacking, possibly not realizing that it did hit his brain, but it took too much effort, although at this point, Isaac's frontal lobe is likely destroyed. It will stab several more times, ultimately resulting in a decapitation because it would be hitting his neck, as it will then try to stab the head further as it rolls away. But that doesn't happen to me though, because we're gigachads around here. After doing what we all know should be done and grabbing the proboscis, Isaac tells the infector he doesn't want a hug. He will shake his head in disgust as he steps on its midsection and rips the proboscis from its body. This appears to be incredibly distressing to the infector, and if anybody ripped off my proboscis, I'd probably feel the same exact way. It will immediately begin leaking fluid, and in some cases, it has been seen it will try to fly away, spewing fluid before finally exploding due to a buildup of fluid in its stomach, not being able to be let out via the proboscis. Ultimately, though, it should be known that the infector dying is not the end. This bacteria is still incredibly infectious, and should other survivors come into contact with it and not know what it is, they could be changed into infectors themselves over time as a result. The Infector Necromorph is one that is the first during the initial outbreak, and its sole purpose is to create many different variants of Necromorphs by being a direct line of infection, affecting the morphological genes of a species to create more aggressive forms. To those that aren't ready, really, they can be easily overpowered by an infector, resulting in them becoming some of the first slashers and leapers, having further consequences concerning counters to the outbreak by creating much more dangerous variants. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoy, then leaving a like would be awesome, as it gets the video out into the algorithm, and subscribing is also pretty great, as we're relatively close to 1 million subscribers, and that is greatly appreciated. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link in the description, where after returning back from PAX West, I'm uploading there once again, and we'll be talking about the mysterious bloop sound in the Pacific, which we aren't really sure what it is. We have theories, but we don't really know yet. I mean, obviously, it's not going to stop me from speculating. And also, speaking of those patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Rosie Kinks. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer, as well as Zach Smith, and our scientists, Argent Sentinel, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanation of B-grade horror movies, Florian, Logan Satome, Lucian Dragon, and Tyson Nakanishi. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running. It is greatly appreciated. Now, it's important to remember, because I've been getting a lot of weird comments lately, this channel's just for fun. We're supposed to be having fun here and learning. Just, I don't know. It's really kind of weird comments. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.